Three of the most scariest stories I've heard. Story 1. My parents won't accept that my brother has passed away. He moved on from this life past midnight on November 21st, 2020. The pandemic was raging and the world was shut down, which proved to be deadly to my small town. There was no escaping it. When James fell ill, it wasn't with COVID. He was deathly sick, yet my parents refused to take him to a hospital. They were the kind that believed in spiritual healing over modern medicine. They're the reason that James is dead. His blood is on their hands. I shared a room with James despite the circumstances. My parents forced me to stay in those cramped quarters with him. I was there when it happened. I saw him pass on. I will never forget the look on his face, how pale his skin was, how gaunt his cheeks were, how his eyes sparkled, not with sadness, but something else. Ryan, he said, his voice barely a whisper. James looked so thin in the moonlight, like a soft breeze could whisk him away at a moment's notice. Thank you. My brows furrowed. For what? I didn't do anything. James trembled with the effort to speak. I could see a faint smile on his lips as he struggled to form the words. Thank you for being such a good brother. A tear trickled down his cheek, and the light left his eyes. When I initially told my parents, they were hysterical. Mom rocked James' body, her heavy sobs reverberating throughout the room. Dad paced back and forth, clutching fistfuls of his hair, muttering under his breath. Eventually, he stopped pacing. He clasped a hand onto my shoulder, his eye bloodshot. Ryan, go to sleep on the couch. We'll handle it. I didn't respond. I simply did as I was told. I didn't think I'd have any luck falling asleep that night. I'd watched my brother die just moments prior, but I must have dozed off at some point. Because when I woke up, everything was wrong. Morning light flooded through the blinds. I sat up, wondering why I felt so exhausted. And then I remembered. I felt an empty pit in my stomach as I trudged to the kitchen. There were three people seated at the table when I walked in. I reached for my chair, ready. Why three people? I glanced up to find Mom, Dad, and James were seated at the kitchen table. My stomach dropped. Dad, Mom, what's going on? What do you mean, son? Dad said. His eyes were worse than the previous night, darker, more empty. Yes, honey, please have a seat. Your food is getting cold. My mother replied. I took a moment, my eyes fleeting the room, each of them to my dead brother. I reluctantly took my seat at the table. Mom and Dad ate in silence. A plate full of food sat before James untouched. Someone had placed a fork in his hand. So, what are we gonna do? About what? Dad asked. He didn't even bother to look at me. About James. What about James? Mom chimed in. You know, about him dying. My parents looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Mom walked up to me and placed a hand on my forehead. Sweetie, are you feeling okay? I'm worried you might have a fever. Dad looked at me directly in the eyes. Ryan, I have no idea what you're talking about. James is alive and well. It was then that I knew nothing was gonna be okay. It would never be okay again. Things went on like that for 5 years. Mom and Dad have hid James's decaying body, his remains, in our home for the last half a decade. No one had raised suspicion. James was now, according to them, homeschooled and lost contact with most of his friends before the illness. None of our relatives live close enough to stop by. Our nearest neighbors are almost a mile away. I have been forced to watch as my parents pretend that my brother was still alive. Mom dresses him in new clothes each day. Dad watches football with him. They hold one sided conversations like he's responding back. I never told anyone because they're my parents. I was scared that they'd get shipped off to foster home if they got arrested, sent to live somewhere worse than here. Now I regret that decision. I've come down with something nasty. I don't know what it is, but I've only had small bouts of lucidity over the previous days, and my mother and my father refused to get me medical attention. I'm afraid. I'm very afraid. If I pass away, that I would end up the same way that my brother did, sitting at a table, my corpse waiting for breakfast. Story number 3. The price is calculated by body weight. My wife hasn't slept in almost 3 days. It's been 3 days since Mary went missing. She never came home from school. No one knows where she is. It's Saturday. We looked all we can for tonight. We have to take a bit of rest for a few hours. My wife stares at a wall. I stare at her. Please, God, let our daughter be okay. A knock on the door. A police officer and a woman in a suit. She tells us she's with family services. They sit us down. The woman starts talking. This is gonna be hard to hear, she said. I hold my wife. Thursday morning, Mary went into the counselor's office. She was interviewed. A second therapist was called in, and both of them concluded that Mary had suffered from severe depression, and at Mary's consent, end of life services were rendered. My wife was frozen. I'm frozen. The cop stares at the floor. The woman smiles and produces paperwork. The procedure was done on Thursday afternoon. Obviously, we would have liked to inform you earlier, but we have a standard cool down period of 3 days before we let the parents know of the news. Now, I'd like to go over the cost of everything: counseling, office time, procedure, and of course, biological disposal. I suppose if there is a bright side, the price of disposal is calculated by weight. So, 7 years old is definitely gonna save you a lot more money than if she waited until she was 17. Her voice broke off and she just continued smiling. The same smile she gave us from the moment she sat down. Story number 2. Be careful of what you say. Mom, I wish you would just die. That was the first time I experienced the curse I had been gifted. She dropped almost instantly. No sound, no gasp, no death rattle, just a thud as she hit the floor. My dad, who was in the other room witnessing this morbid scene, slowly got up and theatrically put on a show, asking what I had done. He thought my mother had dropped to teach me a lesson about being careful what I wished for. He thought he'd play along. That was until he noticed the blood pooling behind her head where she fell. It was treated as an accident. She had hit her head too hard, teaching me a lesson. We were all distraught. My father did his best to comfort me, knowing how a 5-year old would be traumatized by his last words to his mother. He always said, "It's not your fault, bud." But I knew better. More incidents happened after this. I would say things out of anger or sadness, and they would just happen. Little Chrissy across the street, we were arguing over and over. I can't even remember now, but I remember what I said. My face was beet red with frustration. "You're mean, just go away." So he did. He started walking and didn't stop. His parents found him 13 miles away, still walking. A team of medical professionals had to sedate him to keep him from continuing. Even then, he awoke and clawed and snapped his way free to continue walking. At age 10, I confronted my father about this curse. He looked sad, defeated, thinking past trauma had manifested into some fictional scenario. Frustrated, I turned toward Ben, the family dog, and said, "Disintegrate." Slowly, the dog melted into an organic goo at our feet. My father's mind couldn't comprehend it. "Could you have brought her back?" he muttered, the light leaving his eyes. I gave another demonstration, turning towards the goo and uttering, "Alive." The organic mess began to scream, gargling on lungless breath. "Silence," I said. The peace went quiet. My father stared for a while before leaving the room. Over the next few years, my father drilled into me how I could only use certain words, how I must laugh when I'm upset, be calm when angry. He drilled these rules into me day and night. Of course, accidents happened over the years. I used to have two siblings. After that incident, my father's methods became harsh. I remember the sound of the belt as it dripped through the hoops of his pants, and the stinging slap against my back. Even though the power dynamic was in my favor, I never dared to utter a word to him. That's been my life for the last 30 years. I'm in a dead end job, stuck with the shit, because I can't say anything to anyone. My piece of shit coworkers are relentless. I ignore it the best I can, keeping to myself. They think there's something wrong with me. I speak in short, broken sentences. If only they knew. I can't make jokes. I can't vent. I can't even get upset. I can't. My thoughts were cut off with a, "Hey James, why the fuck are you such a weird little bitch?" Derek said, tipping coffee over my desk, getting a huge laugh from the office. I get up and laugh. "I don't know, Derek." And they start laughing louder than that. "I bet you don't, you fucking idiot." I start counting, going over my breathing exercises, reciting my father's rules, but I can't. The laughter was so loud, so frustrating, so. Do you know what I do know, Derek? My decision is finally made, my voice now calm. "Oh, yeah? What's that, dumbass?" "I think you and everyone in this office should just fucking die." I see his expression briefly change to anger before the familiar thudding noise graced my ears.